Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Tuesday, March 21st, 2023. And a special announcement to those of you who get this show through KTOO. Due to a special legislative coverage of special sessions, not just tonight, but Wednesday evening as well, this show will be delayed. You'll still be able to see the Alaska Weather Show on KTOO. However, it's just going to be on a little bit later in the evening until these legislative proceedings are done. And as far as if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. It'll bring you to the National Weather Service's online presence, and it'll bring you a map of the continental U.S. All you have to do is point and click anywhere on this map, and it will pull up the forecast along with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. A quick check of the map this Tuesday afternoon shows winter storm warnings up across northern Minnesota into eastern North Dakota. Another system emerging out of the central Rockies with various winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories extending back into Nevada. And so again, this is a very easy way to see where the most active weather is occurring in the country. Recapping our recent storm that impacted the west and northwest coast over the weekend and earlier this week. These are some of the peak wind gusts along the Capes. In the southwest area there of the state, we had a peak gust up to 88 miles an hour at Romanzoff Cape, and then Cape Lisburn recorded a peak wind gust of 101 miles an hour, and some more stormy weather is heading up to these areas here over the weekend. There is a winter storm watch and blizzard warnings along areas of the western Gulf. I'll highlight those in just a second. And as a result of the snow that falls with these systems and the strong winds, that's going to increase the avalanche danger, especially across the eastern Kenai and Chugach Mountains as we go through the midweek. And then, as I mentioned, more stormy weather is going to impact the Bering Sea and the west coast as we go through the weekend. A couple of different systems will cause that. In the meantime, we have blizzard warnings for the eastern Kenai and the west side there of Prince William Sound, especially centered on Turnagain Arm Pass. Snowfall amounts in these areas could be as high as 7 to 20 inches. And there are also going to be some strong winds associated with a low pressure that's going to ride up just along the coastal areas of Kodiak Island. That winds could gust as high as 55 miles an hour. Winter storm watch has been issued for early Wednesday morning through Wednesday evening for areas of the Alaska Peninsula and at least the east side of the Alaska Range here along Shelikof Strait, Lower Cook Inlet, and all of Kodiak Island. Snowfall amounts up to 5 inches combined with winds of 45 to 50 mile an hour gusts could also produce blizzard conditions there as low pressure strengthens here just along and east of Kodiak Island during the day Wednesday. So here is a remnant low up in the northern Gulf, still keeping some precipitation going over the eastern Kenai and around Prince William Sound. But here's the next piece of energy crossing out of the southeast Bering through the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula, and this is going to spin up a stronger low and work it up into the southwest and western Gulf. So here is the low right now on the weather map. Here's the original low that brought in the frontal system across the west coast with that weekend storm. This is in the process of weakening. This is the next one that's strengthening, and that's where we do expect the problems with some heavier snowfall combined with strong winds to create blizzard conditions at times. Kodiak Island, again, along this outer area of the Alaska Peninsula on up into lower Cook Inlet on the west side, and then also around the eastern Kenai and western Prince William Sound. The low will tend to fill a bit starting on Wednesday and then slowly work its way eastward on Thursday, but then you'll see hints of the next system out here. It's further west as I go into Thursday. The next low is going to ride up along the Kamchatka Peninsula in the western Bering and then swing up across far eastern Russia into the western portion of the Chukchi Sea. And this is going to be another strong system with high winds and some snow that impacts areas of the west coast, especially from the lower Yukon Delta northward. So those of you this weekend, you're going to get a double punch because that storm comes through early on, and and then another one's going to develop out here through the lower Bering and track northeastward, giving another shot of precipitation and wind. So it'll be an active period in the west Saturday, Sunday, and even into early Monday. Temperatures tonight, some single digits below zero along the Alcan border, the far northeast. We see readings above freezing the outer and southern panhandle from Sitka down through Craig and Ketchikan. Areas will dip below freezing around Anchorage Bowl, but we expect readings Wednesday afternoon could be back up near 40 at Talkeetna, upper 30s in the Kenai, and then out here along areas of the panhandle, temperatures will be in at least the lower mid-40s, and then as we go into Thursday morning, some chilly temperatures here along the Alcan border, but not as cold as what they were past couple of weeks, and further westward, some readings down near zero at, say, Savunga, Nome, down toward Imanak, and then for Thursday afternoon, temperatures still mid-upper 30s, a few spots near 40 south central, and the coolest weather will be out here toward the western Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. To close out the month, it's looking like temperatures are going to average a bit below normal south central into the southeast and a little above normal along the north slope, especially the Arctic coast. And then precipitation here in the final days of March may average above normal across a good chunk of the mainland, centered on the Yukon Valley between the Alaska and Brooks Ranges. And we're going to see a series of a couple more stronger weather systems move through the Bering Sea inland as we go through the weekend.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Thank you for joining us on today's broadcast. I'm Emily, the meteorologist, and we're going to discuss your flying weather now. First, let's look at widespread IFR conditions along the northern Bering and into the Chukchi Sea associated with that weakening low as it continues to move to the northwest. As we move to the south, we have IFR conditions in the Gulf of Alaska due to that low pressure system that's strengthening and moving into the area. Then as we move further west, we see a little bit of IFR conditions due to that boundary layer in the Bering Sea. Let's look at your Wednesday afternoon forecast. Conditions will improve substantially as those low clouds mix out towards the afternoon hours along the Chukchi and northern Bering Sea. As we move into the Gulf of Alaska, we continue to see widespread IFR conditions due to that low pressure system. And we do see IFR conditions increasing across the Bering as that system moves further east. As we go into your Thursday morning, again, low clouds and low visibilities across much of the Chukchi and northern Bering Sea. And we're starting to see that frontal system move into the Bristol Bay area, bringing IFR conditions as well. Meanwhile, we see extensive IFR conditions along the northern Gulf Coast and into your Panhandle area. By your Thursday afternoon, we notice again, conditions are going to improve across the north, and we start to see conditions improve slightly as that low pressure system weakens in the Gulf of Alaska. Let's look at your pass conditions. In AKwx Pass up in the Brook Range, we're seeing NVFR conditions improve to VFR conditions towards the afternoon hours. Adigan Pass as well nearby, IFR conditions improving to VFR conditions as well. As we move further south, Lake Clark and Merrifields are going to be impacted by that low pressure system and remain in IFR conditions throughout all of your Wednesday. As we move towards Rainy Pass, IFR conditions in the morning improving towards NVFR by the afternoon hours. Windy Pass is going to remain in NVFR conditions throughout your Wednesday. Isabel Pass is going to start in NVFR conditions and deteriorate towards IFR conditions towards the afternoon hours. Mentasta Pass is going to remain in NVFR conditions throughout your Wednesday. Tahina Pass is going to start in NVFR conditions and deteriorate to IFR conditions towards the afternoon hours on Wednesday. Portage is going to remain in IFR conditions due to that low pressure system being in the area throughout all of your Wednesday. Chilkoot and White Pass as well are going to remain in IFR conditions due to that low pressure system and associated frontal system in the area. So again, low visibilities and low ceilings if you're flying out of Chilkoot or White. freezing levels on Wednesday morning are going to be, again, across much of our forecast area. Temperatures are going to be well below zero, and the freezing level is going to be far to the south into the Gulf of Alaska. You have to go all the way down towards the southern portions of the Panhandle before you get freezing levels at 2,000 feet. Let's look at your icing conditions. We're looking at, due to that low pressure system, we're going to have considerate to moderate conditions across much of the northern Gulf of Alaska coast and into Kodiak Island. So fly with caution due to that potent low pressure system. As we move away to your west, you can see, again, associated with that frontal system, we're going to be having isolated moderate icing conditions. And in portions associated with that weakening low pressure system up north, again, isolated moderate. Let's look at your jet stream. We have 85 knots occurring at upper levels right over Anchorage, and 75 knots as you go into the Gulf of Alaska. We do have the upper level low in this area, and we also, as you go further south, we have a separate upper level jet with winds of 105 knots. At 9,000 feet, we have winds of 75 knots and 70 across the Alaska Peninsula with some potent winds at 9,000 feet. And we do have winds of about 55 knots as you move towards the northern Gulf Coast. At lower levels, at 3,000 feet, we still see a 65-knot jet across portions of the Alaska Peninsula and into Kodiak Island. And as we move further west, again, 50 to 55 knots. Let's look at your turbulence. Again, associated with those strong crosswinds, especially through local gaps, we're going to be seeing isolated severe turbulence risk at lower levels in the atmosphere. Again, associated with that low-level jet along the northern Gulf of Alaska.
I can't really name anyone that has so much integrity as she does to the things that she's accomplishing. It's pretty amazing. Having Claire as a role model, just a strong woman in science and just so smart and so kind. It's just a huge confidence booster is that, hey, I could do that too, you know? That's possible, that's successful, that's what I want to do.
I would characterize her as a pioneer in the field.
The amount and quality of the work she's put out is second to none.
I know people who have a lot of tenacity. I know people that have integrity, but it's rare that people have both together in that, that combination that Claire does.
Every morning, Dr. Claire Parkinson gets up before sunrise and runs 2 miles to work. She hasn't missed a day in nearly 40 years. To know the evolution of sea ice and how we observe it from space is to know Claire. This year, she's celebrating 40 years at NASA.
When I arrived at Goddard, which was in July of 1978, it was an incredibly exciting period here. Satellites were pretty new, but a lot of data had been collected.
NASA scientists were inundated with information, and Claire was in a cohort looking at sea ice, trying to make sense of a jumble of very raw, very new data. It was around that time that Claire and her team, at the time led by Dr. Jay Zwally, created the principal sea ice record that we use today.
How does something like that record help you do your job?
Oh, that record is fundamental to understanding sea ice. So without it, we wouldn't know how rapidly it's changing.
You may not realize it, but Claire's work studying the changing extent of the ice caps deeply affected our understanding of climate change, and relatedly, our understanding of how climate change affects life on Earth.
one of the clearest signals for climate change that resonates with people has been this shrinking of the polar ice cap in the summer that we're able to see because of CLAIR's work.
After we had a record that was about 15, 20 years long, we started noticing that the extent of the ice in the Arctic was getting smaller over time.
Sea ice is formed on the surface of the ocean and therefore is made from seawater. The biggest concentration is in the Arctic, and it's also where the biggest loss in sea ice is occurring. Every year, NASA reports on the sea ice minimum and maximum extents. As expected, the data is concerning.
By now, not only has this trend toward lesser ice continued, but it's even accelerated, so that now the decreases are greater than what they had been.
These trends are deeply troubling, but one thing's for sure. Our awareness of shrinking sea ice extent due to climate change was propelled faster and further after Claire Parkinson arrived at NASA.
I mean, she takes her job seriously, and the health and welfare of those instruments in space, yeah, she's on it. You know, it's one of the things you don't worry about because Claire's in the loop on these things. It's going to be fine.
In science, we stand on the shoulders of giants, on the shoulders of those who explored before us. But then, some among us are giants.
For a scientist, it's incredibly exciting to be studying these glaciers and ice sheets right now because they're doing something that hasn't happened in thousands of years. We're watching changes take place that haven't happened since the end of the last ice age. Tuesday was cold, I almost froze my toes. Oh, what's it gonna be next week? Who knows? That's climate. Oh, that's the climate you got. You take a bunch of weather and you average it together and you're doing the climate rock.
Glacial pace. It means something's happening so slowly you can barely tell it's happening at all. That used to describe the very incremental movement glaciers and ice sheets experienced each year. But now that's changing. We're tagging along with 3 NASA scientists to understand the different lengths they go to not only investigate ice sheets and glaciers, but also communicate their often complicated science to the public. First, let's get oriented. Ice sheets, in pink, pretty much occur in only 2 places, Antarctica and Greenland. Glaciers, in yellow, play a key role draining melt off the ice sheet. Glaciers are also found in the high mountains, but we'll get to those in another episode.
So we know that something's happening in Greenland right now that's unprecedented in the last several thousand years.
That's Dr. Josh Willis, oceanographer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Josh and his team are tackling one of the major environmental challenges of the 21st century, trying to answer fundamental questions about how melting glaciers impact sea level rise.
With my mission, Oceans Melting Greenland, or OMG for short, we're trying to understand just how much of Greenland's melt is caused by the oceans.
Along with being one of NASA's top scientists working on the cryosphere, Josh is passionate about demystifying climate change in typically unconventional ways.
I think by reaching out to people with a little bit of humor, a little bit of fun, maybe a song, you really have the opportunity to help people understand and come to terms with what we're doing to our planet. Because it's definitely happening and it's definitely a big deal, and we need to start preparing for it.
Down at the opposite pole, Dr. Kelly Brunt is getting ready for a major expedition.
In December and January this coming year, I'll actually be in Antarctica, down near the South Pole, collecting ground-based GPS data.
This is actually Kelly's second expedition to the South Pole. The first occurred in December and January of last year. Both surveys are critical and will help validate data collected by NASA's airborne campaign, Operation Icebridge, and the recently launched satellite mission ISAT-2.
All three of these layers, that ground-based, that airborne, and the satellite, are all tied together. The ground-based helps validate both the satellite and the airborne helps give us more validation data for the satellites, but also a bigger story with respect to the depth of the ice sheet and what's going on underneath the surface.
While some scientists are taking measurements in the field, others are looking for answers in physics and lines of code.
For me, those projections that we are doing, they do have a very personal meaning.
Dr. Sophie Nowicki is an ice sheet modeler. That means she and her team have the important job of forecasting how ice will change in the future, which also predicts changes in sea level rise. It's a job she doesn't take lightly, especially since urban planning and infrastructure use her team's models to make decisions about the future and safety of their communities.
When we make those projections that are 100 years in the future, 100 years can seem so far away, like I don't have to worry about it, it's just too far. But actually they are not. It's really like the future that we are looking at that our children or grandchildren will see to experience.
Whether it's learning to communicate in new ways, traversing a swath of Antarctica in a massive piston bully, or taking responsibility for an impactful climate forecast, our NASA explorers are pushing the limits of discovery every day. But on a very human level, they're people with families and friends who have a stake in finding out why and how the planet is changing as rapidly as it is.
At least so far, that we have found life, we found water along with it. And so when we try to understand the thresholds for life, where life might exist elsewhere in our solar system and the universe, water is one of those things that we look for.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and let's look now at your marine weather, starting with the sea ice edge. With the recent storm, we've had a number of polynyas open up with a strong southeasterly flow across the region. You can see these areas off of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, as well as down there west of Shishmaref and areas along the Russian coast, north side of St. Lawrence Island. Also here along the Norton Sound, as well as the Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas. And we are expecting at least winds to be not come down a bit here as we go into Wednesday, though keep in mind there is going to be a couple of storm systems lifting across the Bering Sea here over the course of the weekend, which will bring more wind, especially to areas of the lower Yukon Delta up north through the Bering Strait and areas along the Chukchi Sea coast. For Wednesday, for the southeast panhandle, inner channels, winds will be out of the southeast to south 20 knots. There could be some gust 35 knots upwards there north of Petersburg, and then as we go along the outer Gulf Coast in the nearshore waters, 30 to 35 knot winds south of Sitka from the southeast, turning more easterly, gales to 40 knots, waves generally running on the order of 11 to 12 feet. And then on Thursday, winds will continue out of the southeast to south through the inner channels, 10 to 15 knots, waves generally running 2 to 3 feet. The outer coast, though, we have a frontal band that's pushing in. Winds are going to try to turn, get a westerly component with it, either west-northwest to 20, 25 knots. Waves running about 15 to 16 feet. Once you get west of Gustavus from Yakutat on over toward Cape Suckling, we expect winds to be southeast to east, 25 knots or so. And some stronger winds in through Prince William Sound Wednesday, easterly 40-knot gales, and also up here even in Prince William Sound with 9-foot waves. Off the Kenai coast, east-southeast gales of 35 knots with 12-foot waves, and then then here across Cook Inlet, northeast to east gales at 35 knots with waves 8 to 9 feet. On Thursday, easterly winds, Prince William Sound, waves a few feet. Winds turn westerly through the lower portion of Cook Inlet as high as 35 knots there along the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves around 10 feet. For Kodiak Island, with that low passing right along and just off the coast, we expect winds could be as high as 45 knots in that circulation, in addition to the snow that falls and the potential for blizzard conditions at times during the day Wednesday. And then as we go out along the Alaska Peninsula, winds generally turn back around to the west-northwest, 35 to 40 knot gales, waves 8 to 12 feet on the North Pacific side and 8 to as high as 16 feet there north of Cold Bay. Winds won't be quite as strong Thursday. Generally, west winds 25 to 30 knots across the region, waves 7 to 9 feet on the North Pacific side and as high as 10, 11 feet north of Cold Bay as we head on down toward the Aleutians. The Aleutians will see winds out of the west, eastern Aleutians, central Aleutians 30, 35 knots, waves on the North Pacific side around 10 to 15 feet and 11, 12 to 17 feet on the Bering side, turning more southwesterly at 25 to 30 knots west of Adak. And then on Thursday, across the region, winds will generally be out of the southwest around 20 to 25 knots, though they pick up a little bit in the 30 knots there near and west of Kiska, and waves 8 to 10 feet on the Bering side and 7 to 9 feet on the North Pacific side. The ice, at least the advancement has stopped. We're expecting westerly winds upwards to 35 knots near the Pribilof Islands, but winds have come down and have more of a westerly component to them, especially there along the YK deltas into Norton Sound. And winds on Thursday will begin to try and turn a little more southwesterly, though generally in the 10 to 20 knot range. We expect west winds from St. Matthew down to St. Paul 20 to 25 knots. And then on Wednesday across the Arctic coast, east winds 10 to 15 knots. Winds have come down considerably over the Chukchi Sea and along the Seward Peninsula, kind of a mixed bag of winds at 15 to 20 knots with the ice in place. And then on Thursday, easterly winds along the Arctic coast as high as 30 knots there at Kaktovik, but generally lighter winds through the lower Bering Sea and Bering Strait, 10 to 15 knots. But as I mentioned, that storm will be impacting these areas again over the weekend. We're watching the low deepen very late tonight, early on Wednesday morning, just south of Kodiak Island, and then gradually working its way east of there. And it'll begin to fill Wednesday into Thursday. But again, on the backside of that low, there could be a brief period of blizzard conditions during the day on Wednesday, and then the next storm systems impacting areas of the West Coast over this coming weekend.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.